The skull. The skull is comprised of 22 different bones. Most of these bones are joined together by sutures. The bones of the skull can be separated in two categories: 8 cranial bones that surround and protect the brain, and 14 facial bones that form the face and provide for attachment of facial muscles and bone. The 8 cranial bones includes the frontal bone located at the top front of the skull and extends inward, forming the top portion of the eye orbit. 2 parietal bones located on the side of the top of the skull. 2 temporal bones located in the sides of the skull. Underneath the parietal bones, an occipital bone located in the back of the skull. A sphenoid bone that resembles a bat with extended wings is located in the inner part of the skull and extends into the outer part of the eye sockets. And the ethmoid bone, which is located in the inner part of the skull and extends into the inner part of the eye sockets. The facial bones include the 2 nasal bones located between the eye sockets, forming the upper part of the bridge of the nose. 2 maxilla bones which extends backward, forming the front of the upper jaw of the nasal cavity and the bottom portion of the eye orbits. 2 zygomatic bones or cheekbones which also form the frontal outer portion of the eye socket. The mandible, which is the lower jaw bone. Lacrimal bones located on the front inner portion of the eye orbits. 2 palatine bones located in the back of the upper jaw. 2 inferior nasal concha located on the inner side of wall of the nasal cavity, and the vomer located between the nasal concha and that be the basics on the bone of the skull. We're going to look the pia mater, arachnoid mater, and dura mater. We're going to talk about their structures, and we're thinking clinically. I think for a lot of people learning anatomy inside the head, we need to know clearly what mean when we say extradural hematoma and subdural hematoma. Subarachnoid hematoma, it's the aim in with the brain is soft organ. It's covered by 3 connective tissue layers, and then it's covered by the bone of the skull. 3 layers are also called meninges, that's come from the word membrane. So these are the connective tissue membranes, highly collagenous. The 3 layers are the pia mater, which cover the brain very tightly. The dura mater lines the bony cranial cavity, and the arachnoid mater is in between the brain. We can also talk about the blood vessels. A couple of other terms: hemorrhage is bleeding in a hematoma is it's a collection of blood. Localized bleeding collecting in a space, so often bleeding within the skull gets called a hematoma, and there are different types of hematoma in the anatomy that underpins them in really important. So the anatomy is important to all this. The meninges as a whole, the pia mater, arachnoid mater, and dura mater. We can talk about subarachnoid hemorrhage and hematoma. Now we have a better understanding of how the brain is supported and how it's protected. So let's continue to learn about the arteries. To supply blood to the brain, to talk about the redundancies of the circle of Willis, start of the cerebral arteries and the other arteries by knowing any detail. Let's begin with the blood supply to the brain is really important. The blood uses a huge amount of glucose and oxygen. Thinks the brain in here is the reason we got the big heads and the reason why childbirth is so hard. So the circle of Willis provide blood supply to the brain. Essentially, what happens is that it connects two arterial sources together to form the arterial circle, which then supply the brain with blood. The circle of Willis is made up of the first 6 arteries, and the symmetrical components is organized like this. The main blood supply comes from the internal carotid artery, which branches into the ophthalmic artery and the anterior coracoidal artery and the middle cerebral artery, all 3 of which are not part of the circle. Anterior to the internal carotid artery on each side is the anterior cerebral artery and the anterior communicating artery. Connecting them posterior to the internal carotid are the 2 posterior communicating arteries connecting to the posterior cerebral arteries. Finally, the most posterior artery of the circle is the basilar artery. Furthermore, we'll be talking about the 12 cranial nerves. So the 12 cranial nerves are actually a set of 12 paired nerves that arise from your brain. The 2 nerves are olfactory, and optic nerve. I will be presenting two different mnemonics to help remember the cranial nerve. So the first mnemonic goes like O O O, to touch and feel a girl's velvet, so heavenly, try it. Now the first letter of each corresponds to the first letter of the cranial nerve. Here is also a mnemonic to remember whether the cranial nerve is a sensory nerve or a motor nerve or both. The mnemonic goes like, some say marry money, but my brothers say big brains matter more in this life. Before the first letter of each word, the stance of each of the matching cranial nerves in sequential order, like this word S stands for sensory, M stands for motor, and B stands for both sensory and motor. And that is how you remember the cranial nerves. We're going to look all the individual muscles and nostrils of facial expression. Now there are a little bit of special because of course most muscle run from bone to bone, then cause movements the muscle of facial expression. First is the orbicularis oculi, using blinking, winking, and squinting. And orbicularis oris, the kissing muscle. Zygomaticus major muscle using smiling and laughing. Bacinator, compresses cheek used to create sucking action. Zygomaticus minor, elevates upper lip. Nasalis, draw nasal medially. Mentalis, elevates, protracts, and depresses lower lip. Rise aureus, assists in drawing corners of the mouth laterally. Levator labii superior, proper elevator for upper lip. Depressor labii inferior, draws lower lip down and lateral. Lastly, we can talk about the scalp. Now we can spell out scalp to learn its 5 layer. S is for skin, C is for connective tissue, A is for aponeurotic layer, L for lost connective tissue, and P is for pericardium. Alright, thank you for watching.